Hey, what's up everybody? This is Goomer22 bringing you a PDPL Draft Academy video. Today we're going to be going over what I think are the top 10 abilities to get in your VGC Draft League. So I've got these in order here of what I think is the most important. You may disagree with the order here, but either way, I think these are 10 really important abilities to get for your draft team. And without further ado, let's jump into it. So, number one, we've got Prankster. Prankster allows you to have very flexible sets on these Pokemon. You can run a bunch of different status moves. Sometimes they can even go offensive if they have other abilities like Thunderous. But the Prankster aspect of it allows you to immediately put pressure on your opponents when they enter the field, given that you have that +1 priority. And it works, whatever the speed situation is, whether there's weather on the field, whether Trick Room's up, you always have that +1 priority and can exert pressure on your opponents. So there are 14 total Pokemon in Sword and Shield, 4 with what I call fake Prankster. So there are a couple different categories of Prankster Pokemon you can get in a VGC draft context. You can get what I call quality Prankster, and that would be just solid Pokemon, fully evolved with that Prankster ability. So like Whimsicott, Thunderous, these Pokemon are always going to do well. However, in a VGC draft league where there's tiers and you have to manage your drafting points, you may want to go for more budget options. That's where you can get stuff, what I call baby Prankster. So you can get things like Purloin, Morgrim. So they still have that Prankster ability, but they're not going to be as bulky or as offensive necessarily as these quality Prankster mons. They may even get less of those status moves. So they may be a little bit less useful. You may need to run Sash more often, although you can run Eviolite. But still offer some really, really good options. And then there are a few mons that what I call fake Prankster. So you've got Comfey and Talonflame. So Comfey gets the ability Triage, which allows you to have +3 priority on certain moves, healing moves, such as Draining Kiss, Floral Healing. And that can be really useful. Just to go before your opponents, having that priority, similar to Prankster. Talonflame as a similar ability with Gale Wings, which if you're at full health, your flying type moves, whether they're offensive or if they're status moves, will have +1 priority. So you can use offensive moves like Hurricane and Brave Bird, or you can do stuff like Defog or Tailwind, and you get that +1 priority. So that can be really, really useful as well to put pressure on your opponents. So yeah, that's Prankster, and let's jump into number 2. We have got Weather Abusers. So that's stuff like Swift Swim, Sand Rush, Chlorophyll, Slush Rush. I think that speed control is really, really important in draft and in VGC matches. So we've seen weather teams do really, really well in normal VGC, but in terms of draft, it's really, really useful as well. And it's a great alternative speed mode to mess with your opponent's speed calcs, since you can alter your Pokemon's EVs and speed stats each match. Running into weather teams can be really, really awkward in terms of what you want to outspeed, and it can be just really useful for you if you have that weather mode. It can also potentially deter other opponents' weather modes. If you have a strong Swift Swim user like Kingdra, and they have a strong Swift Swim user like Ludicolo, well, Kingdra gets Hurricane, and that can hit that Ludicolo really, really hard. So it may deter the opponents from bringing those weather modes as well. In terms of the available Pokemon, you have tons of Swift Swim and Chlorophyll options. However, you're going to be a little bit more limited if you want to go with the Sand or Hail route. You've obviously got those new fossil Pokemon, stuff like Dracozolt and Arctovish. But overall, you're going to have a lot more options if you go with that Rain or Sun mode. All right, So next we've got Unburden. And this is another way you can get speed advantage over your opponents. The difference here is that with weather, you can only get that speed advantage in one specific way. You have to set that weather. Whereas with Unburden, you have multiple ways to proc this ability. You can do stuff like terrain seeds just to immediately proc that ability, but you can also do stuff like weakness policy and use these Pokemon in a more offensive capability. But typically these Pokemon are seen in supportive roles. Sometimes they can be flexible, like Drifblim I think is a really good example, where you can run weakness policy, or you can run like a terrain seed and set that Tailwind, or use Will-O-Wisp. So there are definitely multiple ways to use Unburden, and there's only 8 fully evolved Pokemon with Unburden and Sword and Shield. So you're a little bit more limited in your options, but I think this can be a really good way to get immediate pressure on your opponents. And so yeah, let's jump into number 4. Number 4 I think is Intimidate. Intimidate is really useful in draft. Obviously there are going to be more ways to play around it than in normal VGC, but it forces your opponent to think more when they're prepping with their strong offensive physical threats, because they may have to deal with a couple of these Intimidate drops throughout the game. You also have to be a little bit cautious because it can be abused by your opponents if they have a competitive or Defiant mod, or if they want to run something like Adrenaline Orb. But on the flip side of that, it can cause your opponent to run useless items such as Adrenaline Orb or White Herb, if they're planning on using that to counter these Intimidate Pokemon. So that can be really useful, forcing certain prep out of your opponent that potentially becomes useless. You've got 13 fully evolved Intimidate users in Sword and Shield, so you've definitely got a decent amount of options there. And I think it can be really useful, especially because some of these Pokemon have different abilities. Like Gyarados can run Moxie. You don't have to run Intimidate, and Moxie's still a really good ability. Luxray's got Guts. Tauros has Sheer Force. So usually you've got other options that you can run as well instead of Intimidate to throw your opponent off. For number 5, we have got Weather or Terrain Setter. The reason why I think Weather Abusers are more important than Weather Setters, and why they're down here at number 5, is because in max modes, you can set your own weather by using Max Geyser, Max Flare, Max Rockfall. Whereas if you just have the Weather Setter without the Weather Abuser, you do get that weather advantage, and you can throw off strong, Muddy Waters, say with Politoed or something like that. However, the difference is you're just not getting that speed advantage. So you still get a little bit of power. And with the Terrain Setters are going to be generally good Pokemon. And they give you seed options as well, so that's pretty neat. But I don't think they're necessary on teams. And especially in max modes, you can just kind of overwrite that terrain with max moves. So it's going to be a little bit easier to deal with in those max formats. But I still think they're really useful. You are a little bit more limited in your options of these setters too. Like there's only 2 rain setters, 3 sun, 4 sand, and 7 hail setters. And then you have 11 terrain setters, especially if you're including things like Grookey and Thwackey. And I think that's what's interesting about these Pokemon is you can go with a more budget option. So I've got Vulpix down here. If you don't want to pay for those high tier Pokemon with your points, something like a Ninetales or a Torkoal, you can go for a more budget option like a Vulpix. Same with Thwackey. If you don't want to pay for Rillaboom, which is usually going to be a higher tier, you can get Thwackey or Grookey if you really want that grassy terrain for some sort of combo on your team. So yeah, there are definitely some really nice budget options for some of these modes. And let's jump into number 6. So number 6 I think is Inner Focus. So Inner Focus gives you a better ability to flowchart your leads, knowing that you can't be faked out. Obviously, you can do this with ghost types, but you don't have to run a ghost type to do this. And the added bonus of Inner Focus is that you can't be intimidated. So if it's a physical mon, that's really helpful. But as well, you don't necessarily get, won't get flinched by these random, rock slides that are coming off, Moltres using the Fiery Wrath. You don't have to worry about getting flinched by those as well. So there's just sort of an added bonus in certain situations as well. You've got 19 fully evolved Pokemon in Sword and Shield. You also have some good unevolved options in Sneasel, if you're trying to do beat up stuff, or Riolu as well, if you're trying to maybe do coaching stuff or you think you're going to be faked out. So yeah, there are some really cool options in Inner Focus, and I think it makes flow charting a lot easier. So that's really, really helpful, especially in non-max formats, but in max formats as well. Next up, we've got Lightning Rod and Storm Drain. I think these can be really, really frustrating if you have a really strong, when you're facing these abilities, if you have a strong electric or water user. They can be used in both supportive or offensive scenarios as well. Think about something like Credilli. You can absorb those water moves and redirect from, a fire or ground Pokemon. But you can also run a Pokemon with Surf next to Credilli, boost that Credilli special attack, and maybe max it and hit your opponents with that +1 special attack. So I like that you can use these in supportive or offensive ways. It also, like I said, can cause really frustrating mind games for your opponent. They don't know if you're running this ability or not. You might be running a Raichu with Static instead of Lightning Rod, but they don't know that, and so it can cause some awkward mind games for them. In terms of fully evolved Pokemon, you do have 8 Lightning Rod users and 3 Storm Drain users. In terms of budget options, you have 7 Lightning Rod and 2 Storm Drain users, and I think these are some good Pokemon to grab as a budget option because you're not going to bring them every week, but in a specific matchup, if your opponent has a really strong water, a really strong electric, you may want to bring that little Pokemon, Pichu or Shellos, just to counter their really strong option. If they have a Dracovish and you're really scared of those Vicious Wrens, well, if you have a Shellos that you're not going to bring every week, it could be really useful in that matchup. Next up, we've got Competitive, Defiant, and Contrary. So these will boost your stats if your stats are lowered, and I think this is really, really cool because it's really great for deterring Intimidate, Icy Wind, Snarl, etc. Any of those stat lowering moves. It's also really useful in max formats because it can scare away those stat lowering max moves. Things like Max Wormwind, Max Ghost. It can be really, really useful in those scenarios. You've got 7 competitive Pokemon, 8 Defiant, and 3 Contrary. So I think these are definitely good Pokemon to look at, and if they're on your team, they can force your opponent to rethink some of their prep, especially depending on who you pair these Pokemon with. Next up, we've got Frisk. Frisk allows you to immediately gain information during the set. Most of these VGC draft matches are going to be best of 3, so getting as much information about what your opponent is running that week is going to be really, really useful. And especially when people like to go for some sneaky strategies in draft and use different items, Frisk is a way to take away some of that, some of those sneaky strategies and immediately sort of get insight on what your opponent is going to want to do on that turn 1. So you've got 9 fully evolved Pokemon with Frisk. You've definitely got some options. I've got Noivern, Dusknoir, Orbeetle down here, all really good Frisk users. So I think it's never a bad ability to get that information on your opponent. Always really, really good to run. And to round it out, we've got Unnerved. Unnerved, I think, is also really nice for flow charting against opponents, because you know that if you have this Unnerved Pokemon on the field, they can't use those resist berries, which are very, very common in draft for specific matchups. If you want to, you run like a Charizard with Chardy Berry, you know that they can't run that if you have this Unnerved Pokemon on the field. So that can be really, really nice if you're flow charting different scenarios with your draft team. It also is just kind of a good ability just to run in general, kind of like Frisk, where if nothing else looks good, you use this Unnerved Pokemon or run Unnerve on them, and it really just makes it awkward for your opponent to run any sort of berry. If they're running Citrus Berry, that's sort of a common item. They won't get that healing, and it can just really, really make it awkward for your opponents. There are 8 fully evolved Pokemon in Sword and Shield, so you're a little bit limited with your options if you are going that Unnerved route, but I still think it's a really, really good ability to run. If you think there are any really, really good abilities that I left off this list, please let me know. If you think I undervalued some of these abilities, or if the order should be different, please let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching. That's going to be my top 10 list of abilities that you should get for your VGC draft team. And that's going to be it. So thanks for watching.